So we'll go ahead and get started. So just some quick background about me. I'm an application developer at DB Services. I've been here since 2017, and I'm a certified FileMaker Developer. Some background about or quick things about the company. We're a member of the FM Academy. We're a sponsor at DevCon, which is FileMaker's annual developer conference, and we are FileMaker's Growth Partner of the Year for the Americas for the second year in a row. So that has to do with licensing, sales, and kind of expanding FileMaker. So our mission is to make organizations more effective and efficient through custom apps. So using some of the techniques that I'm going to go over in this presentation, you can certainly do that. So what are we going to cover? First, we're going to go over the differences between a transactional relationship and a collaboration. Next, we're going to talk about how you can build trust with your customers. Then we will go over how you can leverage that trust to actually change your relationships. Now, whether you're an in-house developer, an independent consultant, or you work for a development firm, you have customers. As Kevin said earlier, if you're an in-house developer, your customers are your coworkers. Obviously, if you're an independent consultant or you work for a firm, your customers are your customers. So let's go over some differences. Transactional relationships typically have very low trust. The reason for that is your customer kind of views you as an expense. He comes to you with a feature and he asks for a price. He just wants to know how much it's going to cost to fix it. Sometimes they'll try to negotiate that price, which is often a very painful process. And then you're going to spend time estimating features that you're not even going to build. You'll be asked to estimate out like 5 or 6 different things, and then maybe they pick one and you forget about the other 4. And that's because decisions are made on cost is what it comes down to, not value. And typically in these relationships, you work for your customer. So in collaborations, typically there's very high trust. There's a level of, you have a personal relationship as well as a working relationship with your customers. Your customers will come to you with a problem and they're looking for a solution as opposed to a cost. So they're coming in knowing that they're going to work with you to find the best course of action, not just a sticker price. And meetings focus on the most important problems, not the cheapest ones. And with this, it's more of you working with your customers in your meetings. So let's go into really what is trust and how can you build it. So trust is a foundation of a collaboration. Nobody is going to collaborate with anybody they don't trust because they're not going to trust you that your opinion is the best course of action. They're going to have a mindset of what they want and they're going to want to do it. They're not going to listen to you. Building trust does not happen overnight. It takes time. It's not something that, even a week. Sometimes it can take months, sometimes up to 6, maybe a year, for your customers to really believe that you have their best interests at heart. And it requires a personal touch. Everybody's different. So you can't communicate with everybody the same way. You have to learn your customers. You have to understand who they are and how they handle advice, feedback, or just communication in general. So one of the ways you can build trust is to set expectations. You have to understand what frustrates customers. Customers don't get frustrated if something costs a lot of money, or they don't get frustrated if something costs a lot of time or takes a lot of time. They get frustrated if it takes more time than they expected or more, and it costs more than they were told. So if you work on setting your expectations, you work on setting your own deadlines, setting timeline, they're not going to be disappointed and they're always going to be happy. You should be transparent with your process. They need to understand everything they're paying for. They need to understand how you design your features, how you estimate your features, how you build them, how you QA them, and how you release them. You can't trust the process you don't understand. And the process is just as important as you are because it's essentially what they're paying for. And you need to keep your expectations realistic. You don't want to set, maybe you think that you could release something a week earlier. And that may be true, but eventually that's going to bite you in the ass. You're going to set something a week early, and then 2 more, 3 more things are going to pop up, and you're going to be out of luck. So if you're consistent with setting your expectations and keeping them realistic, your work in general is a lot easier, and you're going to enjoy going to work every day. So in turn, this makes it easier on you. So again, to reiterate, you do want to be consistent. This is with timelines and also response times. You want to build really good habits with your customers when it comes to response time. If you make a habit of responding to your customers every single email within 30 minutes, every time they email you, for every little thing, then let's say one day you're in a 2-hour-long meeting, a 3-hour-long meeting, and they have an emergency. They're going to email you and expect that you're going to reply in the next 30 minutes, and they're not going to do anything except wait, and then they'll end up waiting for 2-3 hours, and they're going to get really frustrated. Even if it's not your fault, they may not be frustrated with you, but they're going to be frustrated with the process. So if you set expectations correctly, if they know they run into an error, they send you an email and you don't respond, they're going to look for their own solution to essentially get by until you can get back to them. Another way to build trust is to show that you care. You need to get to know your customers. Small talk can go a very long way. Extra 5 minutes, maybe 10, if your customer is really chatty. At the beginning of every meeting, just asking them, how their week's been, what they do on the weekend, how the family is. That goes a really long way. It starts to build, a personal relationship. They get to know you, you get to know them. They get to trust you more because they really learn who you are and what you're about. And just because, if you're meeting with someone every week, 2 weeks, that at 5 minutes, that builds up. And you need to invest time in understanding their needs. You need to understand what their business is about. You need to understand what their problems are, what they struggle with, and really put time into understanding their company. Because if you do that, at that point, you'll know how to solve their problems. You'll know how to understand their problems. You don't want to get into a situation where you start asking questions that makes it obvious that you don't know what's going on, because then they're not going to have a high level of trust with you. And you need to push back when you feel like there's a better solution. Giving an example of this, I had a customer who came to me and he said, hey, I want daily email sent to me of all my jobs that nobody has entered time in for the past 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, obviously we can do that. FileMaker can pretty much do everything. But what is the real problem here? What are you trying to achieve? And what he said was essentially there were jobs that were kind of slipping through the cracks that nobody was working on and that they were forgetting about and getting behind on time, so he needed to stay updated on it. I was like, all right, well, he's in his app every day. All his users are in his app every day. So why not on his dashboard, which is the first screen he gets on when he opens his app, we have a portal that lists all the jobs that nobody's touched for 2 weeks. That will take about 2-4 hours to build compared to a 15-hour server-side schedule sending an email. Saves you time, saves him a lot of money, and really solves the problem in a lot better way. You don't want to be building a report that sends a PDF that's going to be annoying to read compared to an interactive portal in the system that he already uses. And when you do things like that, that's how you really build trust, because your customers understand that you're here to help them, not to just receive a paycheck. And then the last part of this is to actually care. A lot of times you're going to be communicating with business owners or high-level executives, directors, and they have a lot of experience when it comes to dealing with people. Probably even more experience when it comes to dealing with consultants. And they're going to be able to tell if you don't actually care about their company. So you need to act as if it's your company too. You need to really put forth the extra time and effort to getting to know it and trying to help them. And they'll understand. The next way to build trust is to ask critical questions. So you want to ask critical questions in order to get the customer thinking. You don't necessarily want to just have an answer for everything. You want to get them to come to the same conclusion that you're at by asking them questions. So an example of this, I have a customer who has a disposal facility in West Virginia, and it's a waste disposal facility. And they told me that they wanted to track their disposal cost and allocate it into the loads of waste that come in that they bill. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want to also allocate the rest of your facility costs? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, you have an electric bill, do you want to allocate that to loads as well? Now, that's obviously a ridiculous question. So the answer was no. And then I was like, okay, well, then why do we want to allocate disposal costs of a disposal facility to loads? Because they're still facility costs. And they thought about it, and they were like, well, I guess we really don't need to. We just need to know what it is, because when you get more waste, you're going to have more disposal. So that saved us 15, 20 hours, building a feature that they didn't really need. But instead of me just telling them that they didn't need it, they arrived to that conclusion. So I did not need to convince someone who has years and years more experience in waste management than I do that I knew the right answer. They arrived to that conclusion, which meant that I didn't have to even spend any time convincing them. And that's really powerful because it gives the meeting a collaborative feel. They feel like they came in and instead of just they're talking to a developer, but instead of just getting a feature, they really worked out what the real solution to a non-existent problem was. The next thing you can do is not always say yes. There are times when customers will ask you to do something that really isn't in their best interest. Most of the time, customers are going to come to you with wants. They're not going to come to you with needs. So they're going to come to you with features. They're not going to come to you with problems. You need to understand what the need is behind their wants, what the problem is behind the feature. So you need to push back. Again, don't blindly say yes, and then offer a better solution. Say, okay, well, this is your problem. What if we solved it this way? You want to avoid negatives in general when you're in conversation. So instead of saying, well, I don't really like this, that's not good. You want to say, well, why don't we look at this instead? Don't put down their ideas, just offer other ones. In the end, it is their decision, but you want to do your best to make sure that they weigh all their options. And this is really how you discover what the overreaching problem is, because if your customers just come to you with a feature and you just build it every time, you don't really know why you're building it. And if you don't really know why you're building it, you're probably not going to solve the problem a lot of the time. You might, make an assumption that's not true, or maybe the feature just never solved the problem in the first place. Next, I don't know. It's okay not to know. Nobody knows everything. I've had times where customers have asked me questions, even about FileMaker, that I don't know the answer to. And instead of trying to maybe come up with a best guess or something like that, I found that it's best to just say, you know what, after our meeting's over, I'll take the time, I'll look into it, and I'll get back to you. And that shows them that you're going to take the extra time outside of the meeting to look at what they asked you for, kind of dive into it. And then once you found that answer, you can send it to them. And even if they've already found the answer to their question by then, it shows that you actually spent the time to go look at it. And if it's something that isn't even development related whatsoever, it's even better because it shows that your interest is them. Your interest is not your job. And when they start to understand that, that's how you can really build trust. So they are your only customer. Obviously, this is not true. You will always have multiple customers. Even if you're an in-house developer, you have a bunch of employees. But they are only going to have one developer most of the time. So they don't want to hear about your busy schedule or your heavy workload. None of that matters to them. So this kind of goes back to setting expectations. If you set expectations well with timeline, you never have to say, ooh, I'm way too busy, I can't take your work. If they understand that you will always have a lead time if they come out of the blue or do this, that, and the other, then they're never going to get frustrated. But you want to always avoid mentioning your workload because it's just completely irrelevant as far as their mindset is concerned. And you don't want to rush to end conversation in meetings. If you've finished what the meeting is for and your customer is just kind of talking to you, that's extremely valuable. That means that they enjoy talking to you outside of work. So don't cut that short. Keep talking to them. That builds an even higher personal level in the relationship and makes it a lot easier to work with the person. So you may be wondering why I have a picture of a duck here. The reason for that is I look at this as customers should look at you as like a duck swimming in water, right? When you look at it on top, you don't really see that much going on. The duck is just kind of leisurely moving. But if you look at it underwater, the duck's feet are flapping very fast. There's a lot going on, and it's how it keeps it moving. So they look at it from the top, not much is going on, everything's going slow, but in reality, you're working really, really hard underneath. So I actually learned that when I was a camp counselor back in high school. So one of the best. Yeah. So in the end, none of this matters if you don't deliver. You can set great expectations. You can have a great personal relationship. You can ask critical questions. You can do all this stuff. But if you don't get the job done in the end, none of it matters. Delivering is essentially cashing out all of your earned trust. So you need to do this by meeting your expectations. Delivering on time, all that. So this is everything when it comes to actually building trust. So now we're going to go into how you can leverage this trust to influence your customer. And the first on here is expense versus investment. This is one of the biggest things that customers struggle with, is they look at their system as an expense. They look at it as a cost because they're not in application development. They're construction, they're electrical management, they're waste management. They're not app dev. So they look at their system as an expense. But you need to shift that focus into that it's not an expense, it's not a cost, it's an investment. Their system is a part of their company. It's what makes their company run. When they're paying their employees, they're not expending. They don't have cost for their employees. They're investing in their company and improving their company with better people. Just like with their system. Expanding their system is an investment and puts money back into the company. The reason for that is the system oftentimes is the most important part of the company. It's what runs the company. Sure, the people do the work, but the system is what makes it easier and what facilitates the work. So the better the system is, the more work they can do, the more revenue you get generated, the more valuable the company is. So it's quite literally putting money back into your company. And if they can understand that, then your meetings are going to go so much smoother. And it's going to be a lot easier for you guys to really solve problems. Application development is expensive. It doesn't matter if you're in-house. It doesn't matter if you're independent. It doesn't matter if you're part of a firm. It's expensive. There's no getting around this, so don't pretend like it isn't. Don't pretend like stuff's cheap. Nothing's cheap. That's just how it is. What's important is that your customers understand the value of what you're doing. They're understanding that, yeah, it might be a lot of money, but the amount of value that you're creating is more than that. So I had a customer who we used to struggle a lot with how much everything would cost. And he would ask me to estimate out these features, and I would do it, and he'd be like, I don't want to spend that much money. It's not that important. So this phrase has saved me a lot of time and effort. We solve expensive problems, so let's focus on solving your biggest problems so we know it's worth it. What this does is it basically tells your customers, look, if it's not a big problem, let's talk about it later. Like, we can take care of that later. Let's focus on what's really your main pain points are right now, what your main bottlenecks are in your company, because you know they want to fix that. So whatever the cost is, they're essentially going to pay it because it's going to pay for itself once it's fixed. So this in turn saves you time because you don't have to estimate out stuff that you never build. Avoid giving out menus. Customers will often ask for estimates on multiple features at once. I had a customer who would, every time we finished something, he would be like, okay, can you give me the cost or price on these next 5 items? And you want to avoid doing this because what you're really doing there is you're wasting time on 4 features because they're going to pick one and you're not going to do the other 4. And then by the time you do the other 4, the system may have grown and your estimate's no good anymore. So a phrase that I like to use is, let's focus on what will help you most right now, then we can talk about the rest later. That way you can pinpoint what the most important feature is, you estimate that out, you deliver that to them, and then they're pretty much okay with the cost at that point. Once I have my customers on the same wavelength as me when it comes to this, I very rarely will estimate out a feature that doesn't actually get built. It's just extremely rare. And that's really nice because nobody wants to spend the time to work out what the best way to do something is and then just someone say, nah, I don't want it. That sucks. It's annoying. So you want to avoid doing that as much as possible. So we'll go into kind of the benefits of what a collaborative relationship is. So with your customer, their most important problems get solved first. You're not building things for them that are just cheap. It's a lower cost in the end because you're not wasting time talking about what may not get built. You're not wasting time talking about price. Your meetings are faster. They're more effective. And they have more opportunities to improve their business because you're focusing on their most important issues. And in turn, they become more invested and they have a more positive outlook on their system. And that's something that's extremely important. You do not want your customers or even their employees to be frustrated or dislike your system. It makes it extremely difficult to work with them. It makes it extremely difficult to get them to invest into it. Some benefits for you. You have better customer relations. It's a lot easier to work with people you have a personal relationship with. Suddenly your meetings go from, oh geez, I have to talk to these people for hours, to, oh yeah, I get to catch up with these 3 customers all in a row. Awesome. It makes your work life that much easier. Saves you time because you don't have to estimate all these features. You don't have to worry about how you're going to convince someone to buy something. And you don't have to worry about price. Generates more work for you. I mean, if your customers trust you, they're going to ask you to do more things for them. If they know that you're going to solve their problems instead of just building them features, they're going to bring you more problems. So you don't have to worry about, ooh, maybe I should go with this more expensive solution because it's more work for me, because you're going to keep getting work. And in turn, increased customer commitment is actually a huge benefit to you, because if you've worked with many customers, you know that nobody likes the customer who you release a feature to, you say, hey, let's test this. They don't reply to you. 2 months later, you've forgotten about them. They call you and they say, hey, this is broken. I need you to fix this right now. And it's like, well, where have you been for the past 2 months? As opposed to when you have a relationship with somebody, they're going to answer your email. They say, oh, this is great. I love it. This is the feedback we have so far. It's really easy to plan for. It's a lot less sporadic. So I'll open up for some Q&A. This is the conclusion of the first presentation.
Do you find it's, I assume it's a lot harder to do that with customers who are mainly talking about the phone, and most of us are not being face to face?
No, I'm actually not face to face with any of my customers. It's all over the phone. Yeah, I mean, because really when you're face to face, it's not anything more. You're just seeing them. I mean, there are tools you can use that's a lot easier, like GoToMeeting, stuff like that, so you can show them. But if you're still communicating, through voice and all that, so if you can express these ideas, because if I gave you this presentation and I wasn't sitting here, if I was just on the phone, you would still have the same. You would have the same takeaway, maybe a little less because you don't have my awesome hand movements and all that. But you would overall have the same takeaway. So I don't think that phones limit you.